This is Brent. Brent Allen Winters, commonlawyer.com, www.commonlawyer.com. Coming to you, coming at you from the remote hinterlands of the Wabash River Valley, where the hogs, the frogs, and the dogs keep up a racket all night long. The Catechism on the Constitution going here. And we're up to question out of 333 questions. We're up to, don't tell me, Miss Francine, question number 290. And by the way, Lord willing, if we get to 1 Peter, we'll be at chapter 3, verse 20. We're moving ahead. But as to the Catechism on our Constitution of the United States, we're at 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 20. No, Catechism 290. Looking at the wrong number. 290 out of, let me double check. It's funny, I've been saying this all this time, and I have it in my head as 333, and yeah, I'm right, 333. So 290 says this, Catechism of the Constitution of the United States. When the states united under the Constitution, what was done with the wild lands? He didn't say the wild men, and there were plenty of wild men on the wild lands back then. Matter of fact, some bloodthirsty, murderous men, not some, a lot. And they were killing people on a regular basis without distinction between age, sex, or condition of infirmity. Age, sex, or condition of infirmity. That's a quote from our Declaration of 76 about the red men tribes. Talking to somebody the other day, we're talking about, well, they'd been out west, and I'd lived on Indian land and worked on Indian land. And of course, it's called Indian land, Bureau of Indian Affairs and all that. That says that. But that word Indian doesn't work anymore because there's so many Indians among us now from Asia. And so when you say Indian now, you don't know whether you're talking about an Asian or an American, see? So they've gone to the word that says Native Americans. Well, that doesn't work either. No, that's silly. A Native American is an American that's been born. They are native to the land. Their nativity is in America. Is your nativity in America? Yeah, mine is. Some of you are listening. You were born here. I was born here. Yeah, right here on the land in America. So I'm a Native American. But that doesn't mean that the people that are of the tribes that lived here, doesn't mean they're not Native American. They are too. So that word doesn't work. Oh, the Native Americans. That's silliness. I'm not going along with the political correctness. Now, if you said indigenous, that's a big fancy word, isn't it? The indigenous people of the United States, that would refer to the tribes that were here before the white folk got here. Now, that would work, but nobody's going to use that word. So I've been just saying red men tribes that way. I'm not talking about the white men. I'm talking about the red men. Now, are they red? No, not really. I mean, I was at a Thanksgiving dinner day before yesterday. We didn't plan this, but I got to looking around. There were about 15 people there. And I counted 6 nations represented at that meeting. 6. There was a lady there from Ecuador in South America. She's married to a fellow from North Dakota. There was a lady there from England. She is married to an American. There was a young man there from Uganda. There was another young man there from Nigeria, Uganda, England, Ecuador, the United States. Well, there was one other one. Well, there was a lady there from the Philippines. That makes 6. 6 different kind of people there. And we got to talking, and I said to the boys, for one of the boys, one of them from Nigeria, and the other and his buddy was from Uganda. And people will say, well, they're Africans, they're black. And I said to them both, I said, you're really not black. I'm looking at you. You're not that black. I mean, that girl from the Philippines, her hair is black, and she's standing next to you. You ain't that black. You're really dark brown. And the lady from the Philippines is lighter brown. And the woman from the Ecuador is just a slight much difference, lighter brown than the lady from the Philippines. And the lady from England, who lived in England, her mother was English, she's certainly not white. She's a lighter brown, but not very dark brown, but she's lighter brown. And I had a napkin in my hand, a white napkin. I held up beside my face and I said, you're saying I'm white? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, look at this napkin. Am I white? No, the napkin's white. I'm not that white. So really, what do we got here? We got a whole lot of people here that are different shades of brown. That's what we got. Now, when I was born, they told me, and I've seen babies born this way, they look rather red, very red. And then they begin to, it's a kind of a funny red. Then they change color. And then if you're a white or a Caucasian, you'll get a little whiter. But then when you get embarrassed, your face will turn red. And then the white folk, when they get sunburnt, they get bright red on the red necks. And then after it's been summertime for a while and they've been out in the sun, then they turn a dark brown. And then we have the gall to call other people colored, which we're more colored than they are. We change colors. As folk they say are white, we really aren't white. So it really comes down to the pigment in your skin. Then you got your culture. But no matter what culture you are, we live in a common law country with a culture from England, from the island of Britain, England, Scotland. That's our culture. You've heard me say this before. And if you're not interested in that, and not willing to learn about it. It's a Christian culture, by the way. I said to the fellow from Nigeria, I said, we got something in common besides what we're talking about. We both were born in colonies of Britain. Nigeria was a British colony. Their native tongue is English. And they get along with the white folk really well in Britain. They don't have the same hatred that they have in America. You know, they constantly in America, the left and the useful idiots of the left are trying to work the black man and the black woman up into hatred of the white man. And vice versa, if they can get the job done. It depends. They just want that hatred going. That's how they make money. Hatred. Now, do you think your culture is better than other people's? I would say we're talking about the common law tradition, which is God means for all men. Oh, he means it for everybody. We didn't think up this stuff ourselves. It happened over a long period of time, but it came from where all mankind began the second time. All mankind began a second time with the man we call Noah. He had three sons and they fathered Adam's race. He is the second father of Adam's race. There was Adam, he was the first father. And then all of Adam's race got wiped out except 8 people. And then there was Noah. I know some of you are saying, what do you mean? Everybody got wiped out. I don't believe that. I've had people that are hardcore Christians tell me they don't believe that. And one fella wrote a book about it. What I mean to say was he denied that the flood of Noah was worldwide and he denies that it wiped everybody out. Now, I think that's given the language of the Hebrew tongue and in the English, you can read it. It's pretty clear the way it's translated in most of the translations that Adam's race got wiped out, and that was the purpose. Of course, you can go back to Genesis 6 and read about why that happened. Very important reason. Bottom line, what God wanted to do was, and he did. He always gets done what he wants. Don't kid yourself. He doesn't try. God doesn't try anything. He just does it. What he wanted to do was wipe out a race of demonic men. That's what he wanted. And all of the race of Adam had been polluted genetically with this. And that's what the Bible says. I think it's pretty clear. The New Testament talks about it too. And it's a theme throughout the Bible, but he wiped them all out because there were only 8 people that didn't have that. Noah did not have that in his. He hadn't been polluted that way. So God used him to wipe out or to preserve the race of Adam. But the problem was, see, here's why did God do it? Well, to reaffirm and continue the undertaking, his promise of his trust settlement with his people, to become a member of the Godhead, to become the Messiah that would pay the penalty for the law breaking of his named beneficiaries of his trust settlement. There it is, plain and simple. That's it. He did it, got it done. So here we are on the land, isn't it? Isn't it of great note as we go through this catechism on the Constitution? He asked this question about the wild lands. Land? There's nothing in God's relationship with man that doesn't come back to the foundation of that relationship, which is entrusted land. Whether it be the parcel you live on or the little tiny bit you live on, or the real estate parcel, or the county you live in, or the township, or the state, or the country, it's all land, and God has given it to men. Men do not live on the ocean. They cross the oceans. They don't stay there. I mean, even if they live in houseboats, they have to tie up to the shore. They're dependent. We're all dependent upon land. That's the way God made mankind, and he gave us land. And what did he say to do with the land? I'm talking about God's trust settlement with man in its most fundamental expressions. At the creation of all things, including our grandma and grandpa, Adam and Eve, what did God say to them? What are the terms of this trust settlement? He said, scatter over the land. Most translations say earth. The Hebrew word is aretz. It means land. Scatter over the land. Now, stop right there. Stop right there. We don't have to go further for purposes of this question. Let me read it again. When the states united under the Constitution, what was done with these wild lands? Now, what wild lands is he talking about? We'll go back to the question before. Every question is built upon the one before it in the Catechism. When the colonists separated from Great Britain, was their territory, their land, all peopled? Peopled. Answer, no. Large tracts of land in several of the states remained in natural wild state. Remained in natural wild state. To put it bluntly, to put it simply, beyond about 100 miles from the seaboard, about 100 miles from the east coast of what is now the United States, was nothing but the wild and woolly West. Now, there were some settlements that came a little further, but it was still wild and woolly beyond 100 miles. 100 measly miles. That's where all the settlements were, even when our country started. And people were pressing into the wilderness. Why? Oh, they wanted land. Oh, why'd they want land? Because they knew they couldn't live without it, and the government wasn't going to give them anything. See, today, if you have a problem, you fall back on the government. You go down and apply for Social Security or public welfare, or something like that, or SSI. So you won't starve to death. It's hard to starve to death in America today. If we thought we were going to starve to death, we didn't get out and do something, we'd be out trying to find land. Don't kid yourself. Of course we would. That's how we got the whole blasted continent peopled. But at that time, when our Constitution of the United States was written, everything west of 100 miles from the coast was the wild and woolly wilderness. And there were a lot of tribal folk there who were exceedingly dangerous and murderous. No other way to say it. That's what they were. Oh, there were some of them that were friends, and God used some of them even in our war against Britain. Did you know that there were whole detachments of American red men in the Continental Army? Yeah. I remember reading J.P. Martin's memoirs. He was from Connecticut. He was part of the Continental Army, and they were getting ready to make a move on the British. And there was a detachment of Mohawk or Iroquois, I forget which one it was, that had chosen to fight the British. And he said they had a lot of fun having shooting contests with these red men. Of course, they didn't have guns, they had bows and arrows. And he said they were pretty good, but they could outmatch them with their rifles. But having those bows and arrows, they were nothing to be trifled with. They were dangerous. Well, it's not like you make a blanket statement and said they're all against us, but the truth is most of them were. And by the time the white man, the country started, the white man moved west, the tribes, the red man tribes, began to confederate, consolidate to resist the white man. Well, a lot to be said there, but it's beyond the scope of our Constitution of the United States other than to say this. Our common law is the law that God intends for all men to be common among them. It isn't. It isn't. Just a few countries have our common law tradition, but another name for our common law tradition is law of the land. Law of the land. Our Constitution of the United States uses that phrase in Article 6, law of the land. Or you could translate it land law. That phrase is lifted from Magna Carta, chapter 39, where it says that no man's life, liberty, or property shall be taken, or the king shall not move upon him the government, unless, according to the law of the land. Land. It was written in Latin, so it says lex terram, law, land. Terram, like territory, land. Terra firma, the ground. Land. That's Magna Carta. We lift that phrase out. Our common law, the name for it during the days of Magna Carta was not common law. No. People didn't call it that. That came later. At that time, people called it law of the land. Law of the land. Before Magna Carta, people called it law of the land. Why did they call it that? Because everything about it related back to the land. Everything. Without land, they even said this, without land, there is no law. Did you know that people all over the world have had that idea? I mean, I was reading about the Chinaman back, 2,500 years ago. They had a religion called Taoism, Taoism, I believe it was, Taoism. Yeah. And in Taoism, they said that all true law comes from the skies to the land and arises from the land to the use of man. They understood that much. They had everything else wrong. They did not worship the creator of all things, but they understood. And down in Australia, those Aboriginal people, they call them. That Aborigine is a word that can be applied all over the world. It means the first people, the indigenous people, but they call them Aborigines there. But we would say they're a black people. They are. But they're a little different than the Africans, but they're as dark as the Africans. But their hair is not as of the same texture. They're pretty rough, live out in the bush. And when the white folk got there, they discovered that these Aborigines, they played the didgeridoo. Play me didgeridoo, Lou, play me didgeridoo. Play till I shoot through, Lou, play me didgeridoo. That's that long thing that they would blow and have that whoa deep sound that they would communicate over long distances with. And of course, they had their boomerangs, and they had their, well, they did a lot of things, but they believed they had what they called the walkabout. Walkabout. When a young boy reaches a certain age, he had to go through the walkabout. Yeah. That means that they would turn him loose out into the wild bush, wild and woolly bush, without anything, not even an old twisty rag around his private parts. I mean, he's naked as a jaybird out there in the wild bush where the dingo dogs were and the other wild critters would eat him. And he had to survive for a certain period of time. And when he came back, then he was a man. That was called the walkabout. They still do that. But they believed, those Aboriginal people, just from the laws of nature, they understood that law and the standards they lived by, they could see it, just like in Taoism, they could see these standards played out in creation from the land. Everything that happened according to well-defined rules that you couldn't change. I mean, if they would drop a rock, it would always fall to the ground. It wouldn't go up, it would go down. They recognized that this is something attached to the land, and everything is drawn to the land. Everything. Water runs downhill, rocks drop. Of course, we know now other things are drawn to the land. That's why everything that goes up must do what? It must come down. We even say that in our tongue. Whatever goes up must come down, we say. Well, that's because everything is drawn to the land, to the earth. They understood that. And in our common law tradition, we understand that too. And it's part of everything in our common law tradition comes back to the land. And so when he says here, when the colonies separated from Great Britain, was all their territory peopled? Answer, no. Well, did God want people out on the land? What does it say in Genesis chapter, what is it, chapter 2? I have to look here. Yeah, chapter 2, isn't it? No, chapter 3. It says, be fruitful, multiply, to our grandpa Adam, be fruitful, multiply, have babies. Why is abortion wrong? Because everything that's wrong is contrary to the fundamental trust settlement of God. And when the Bible says be fruitful and multiply, abortion does what? It is the devil himself trying to stop men from doing what comes naturally, and that is multiply. You can't scatter over the faces of the land unless you first multiply. Our common law tradition recognizes that. Oh, too dark in here to see it, but it's right there. Be fruitful, multiply, and the old King James says replenish the earth. It doesn't mean replenish, it means plenish. People, as he says here, people the land. God wants all the land. It's his land. He's the allodial landlord. He wants all of it people. Do we miss that? Why is abortion wrong? As I'd said, everything that's wrong among man is something that mitigates against the fundamentals of God's undertaken trust settlement. Well, he says here, so abortion is wrong. Why? Because it stifles productivity. It stifles babies. God likes babies. He likes lots of them. Why? Because without them, there can be no scattering over the land, and his land remains empty. He didn't want that. He made that clear. And if you trace that through the Bible, it's part of the Bible all the way through to the very end. It's stressed in the book of Revelation. in all sorts of ways. So it says, when the states united under the Constitution, what was done with these wild lands, which God wanted people to be fruitful and scatter over the earth? Answer, they were given up to the several states that owned them and set apart as common property for the good of the whole, for the general welfare. Did that happen? Let me tell you what happened, more particularly in America, how this played out. He doesn't say it right here. I told you about the Over Mountain Men. The Over Mountain Men were down in the area of North Carolina, and they were near the seaboard, and they got together and said, we want to go west and scatter over the land. But they had to, if they're going to farm, they had to get over top of the mountains, because the best land is not for farming, is not in the mountains. It's over the other side of the mountains. So away they went. But the King of England, George, had decreed that no British subject was to go west of the Allegheny Mountains. Those of you that went to the public pool system, maybe you don't know where the Alleghenies are, or maybe you just aren't interested in geography. But if you look at America, you have the East Coast, then you have the Piedmont Plains, and then the Allegheny Mountains that stretch clean from way up into Pennsylvania and structurally into the Adirondacks of New York, clean up there, all the way down to Birmingham, Alabama. Long ridges, hundreds of miles long and high, a barrier. And George said, you can't go west of those. I'm not going to let you do it. Well, why did people want to go west? Because they wanted to scatter over the land, and they knew the land was farmable. If they had little land, they could survive. Remember, the government wasn't going to take care of them. As that one fellow said, oh, I don't know who wrote that poem. I was young and full of zip. When they opened up the strip, I was young and full of zip and wanted a place to call my own. And so I made the race, and I staked me out a place, and I settled down along the Cimarron. I planted wheat and oats, got some chickens and some shoats to have some ham and eggs to feed my face. Listen, if you got a little land, you can have a few chickens and you can have some eggs to feed your face. I went out this morning and found 3 eggs, about a dozen hens. It's getting a little chillier back here in the Wabash Valley. They're not laying as good, but if you got a little place to keep a few hens, you won't starve. You got a little patch to put a garden on, you'll be shocked and surprised how much produce you'll produce. You'll be eating food till it's coming out your ears if you can keep a little garden and have some chickens. I encourage you to do that, by the way. I know people, and it's getting popular in America. They're passing ordinances in the towns and cities that allow people to have chickens within the city limits. I do know some people, though, they say you can have a rooster, but if your rooster crows, you got to get rid of him. So some people, there are 2 ways you can stop a rooster from crowing. No, 3. Number 1, you can kill him. Well, if you want to have a rooster around to fertilize your eggs, that option's out. Now, if you just want eggs and a hen that'll lay eggs, you don't have to have a rooster, but you can make little chickens with a rooster. They can fertilize the eggs. For you, those of you that are out of touch with reality, you got to have a rooster to have little baby chicks, but you don't have to have a rooster to have eggs. But the eggs are actually better, so they say, if they're fertilized. Better for you. But you can kill your rooster and eat him. Don't waste him if you kill him. But if you don't want to do that, you can have him operated on. But that costs money. Why do that when you can put a device on the neck that keeps him from crowing? You can do that. Now, I think that having an operation and putting that device on his neck, that's just me talking, seems rather cruel to stop a rooster from what makes him a rooster. What makes a rooster a rooster? Well, one of the big things is he likes to crow. He likes to sound off. He likes to declare who he is. If he can't declare who he is, that'd be frustrating to him, I would think. So I suggest if you live in a place where they won't let you have a rooster crowing, just get a rooster and don't worry about it until somebody complains. But that's just me talking. That's what I do. But that could get you a ticket and a fine too. But I just feel that strongly about keeping a rooster from crowing. And I can't help but think, friends, you tell me what you think in the chat. I can't help but think that if God made a rooster to crow and you try to stop him from crowing, there's something that you're stopping there that might be good for everybody. I don't know what it is. I got some ideas, but there are probably a lot more things about a crow and rooster that I don't know. But I just know this: you try to stop nature, how God has made nature, and you're depriving yourself of something. I believe that. Well, for what it's worth, that's why I say, why keep a dog in the house when you let them run loose? Now, not everybody can let their dog run loose. I get it. They live in town. Some of them even keep the dogs in the house as a guard dog for good reasons. Yeah. But if you can let an animal do what God made an animal to do, they'll do a lot better. And if you can let a man do what a man's made to do, he'll do a lot better. And if a woman will just relax and do what she's made to do, she'll feel a lot better. And all of creation is that way. And God said, be fruitful, multiply, and scatter. Now, isn't it funny? The one thing that we, sons and daughters of Adam, don't have to try to make ourselves do. The one thing that we do and we can't stop ourselves from doing, the evil empire has figured out a way to stop it. The one thing that we do that we can't stop ourselves from doing is sex. Well, it's natural. You don't have to try to do it. You want to do it. Why? Because God made you that way. But he did put limits on it, say, well, you can't just do it any old way you want, but there is a sex drive. And if my father didn't have one, I wouldn't be here. And if Miss Francine's father didn't have one, she wouldn't be here neither. And neither would you be here if your father didn't have one. Your mother gets caught up in, next thing you know, she gets caught up in it. Next thing you know, you got a family. But that thing that is hard to stop, the devil is trying to figure out a way to stop it. He's got all sorts of things he uses. But do you see that mitigates? This is why it makes it wrong. You say, Brent, I don't agree with you. Well, I'm just telling you my experience, my testimony, what I see in the Bible. Do I do what the Bible says persistently? No, a lot of stuff I don't do by inadvertence, mistake, or misunderstanding, or just plain stubbornness. But nobody's going to tell me I'm wrong about what it says when I see it clearly. No, it says that. If we're not doing it, that's another matter. But it says, be fruitful and multiply. And there is no limitations put on it. Matter of fact, we even have an incident in the Bible where a man was, well, he was supposed to make a baby. And instead of doing that, he withdrew at the last second. The Bible says he spilt his seed upon the ground. You know what God did to him? Killed him. Now, does that give us a hint, maybe? And that's the reason for the Bible, is to give us some clues or to tell us outright about how God feels about stuff. Now, there's more about that in the law of God later, but clearly, God spreads his gospel by multiplication and the purposes of his trust settlement for his people by multiplication of his people. He says to the Israelites, he says, I will not give, I've deeded this land over to you, but I will not give it to you until you can bear it, until you can take care of it. And the way that's going to work is this: as you multiply and occupy, I will drive the wild beast out in front of you, and then you will take dominion over the land. That's never changed, friends. We got mountain lions and grizzly bears eating people in America. Where I live, when I was growing up, when And when I was growing up, people populated the Wabash Valley and farmed it. It wasn't that it was crowded, but there were people every whip stitch, and they'd farming the land, running cattle, building fence, had a barn, a house, and all that. And the timber wolves were not killing our livestock. It's a true story. The brown bears and the black bear were not killing livestock or people. Coyotes were not threatening our chicken houses. But now, all of those things threaten the livestock where I live. Why? Because the evil empire has figured out and done a good job of depopulating the countryside. And people migrated into the cities. What happened? Well, here's what happened, and this is my phrase for what it's worth. Let me see if I can remember it. Where land depopulates, wild critters propagate. Where land depopulates, wild critters propagate. They move in. That's why in some of the towns out west, mountain lions are sneaking. They're in towns now, killing chickens, killing dogs, killing cats, and killing men and women. Coyotes are surrounding people that are elderly. In my world, in the Wabash Valley, and it's been discovered some of them have been killed by a pack of coyotes and eaten, who didn't have the wherewithal to protect themselves. That's why guns are important, of course. It doesn't make any difference how civilized people think their world is. God wants the land to be populated and taken care of according to the terms of his law. And he tells us how to take care of it. And he's very precise about soil erosion, how to manage wildlife, how to manage your own land, and how not to pollute the land. Very precise about all those things. I want to make this point. Don't miss this. I've been, you've heard me say, I've had my head buried in the Bible for over 4 decades. And I enjoy and do every day. I translate the Bible, try to stay with it. But every detail, and I see a lot in the Bible, no matter what it is, I relate it back in my mind constantly back to these fundamentals of the trust settlement of God. Why are we here? Why are we here? And every person born of Adam's race, and that's you, participates in this trust settlement at the fundamental level because you, no matter what your condition is, you are a part of that multiplication. And some of you have done a lot of scattering. You've been a lot of places and you're still doing it. And that is what God wants. And America, more than any country in the world, has shown that in a way nobody ever has. We just kept scattering. When I was born, our population has at least doubled, if not more, since I was born. 150, 160, 170 million, something like that, back in the 50s. Now we're pushing 350 million. And still, we've got a lot of land that hasn't been occupied. And God wants it all occupied. And our laws here have been biblical. We have made our laws so that it would encourage, not discourage, scattering and populating. Now, it says here in the Catechism, for instance, that the states had land, and that land was opened up. And here's what happened in America. I wanted to talk about how it happened here. The Crown of England forbade that anybody go west of the Alleghenies. And if you did, you would be executed. That was the law. And that's what happened to the Over Mountain men. The officer called Ferguson in charge. He was commanding officer of one of the Highland regiments from Scotland under the crown. And he wrote a letter to the Over Mountain men, say, if you don't come back from over the mountains, I'm going to come capture you. And the penalty, he told them, I'm going to draw you, quarter you, hang you, or I'm going to draw you, hang you, and then quarter you. That means cut your bodies up in little pieces. And you remember me saying, they said, well, he's sworn he's going to kill us. So we put in a lot of effort and investment here, clearing land, planting crops, building cabins to live in. I've got our families here. If he's going to come and kill us and risking our lives because the red men would kill them if they could get away with it. So they went after Ferguson and they killed him and killed almost all of his 250 man unit that were headed that way. They called them at a place called Kings Mountain. You want to look it up? Look up the Battle of Kings Mountain. It's right in the corner of western North Carolina. That's where they found him, and they didn't hesitate. He swore that he was going to kill them, and he obviously was on his way to do it. They beat him to the punch. That was during the American War for Independence from Britain. Well, that put a damper on the British and what they wanted to do. But ever since then, of course, people had been coming west. Even during that war, the well-known Daniel Boone came through the Cumberland Gap into southern Kentucky and then migrated up toward the bluegrass region, the basin. That's where the land was the best in Kentucky for farming, although there was land all over Kentucky that could be farmed, but not like, of course, in the Midwest, but pretty hilly and rough, actually. But he migrated into there. The Over Mountain men were where they were, but all that land from the East Coast, as far as land went, and they didn't know how far it went, you see. They didn't know. The charters said, as far as land goes, for each of the colonies along the seaboard was chartered to them, promised to them, and those, by the way, our courts had held to be contracts. And the state courts were not allowed under our Constitution, as you know, if you should know, the state courts were not allowed to diminish or tamper with any obligations or debts of contract. And it was ruled that those initial land grants from the Crown of England were by promise, of course. What is the law of contracts? The law that deals with promises, undertakings. Sometimes there's one promise, sometimes there's a quid pro quo. A charter is one promise. Of course, the people that take advantage of that promise that the crown gave about giving land said, if we come on the land, we will be obedient to our common law. We will live according to our common law. That was the law of England. That's easy enough. Our common law is compatible with the Bible. It's more than the compatible. It's consistent with the Bible. They said, we'll do that. But then, because those land grants extended as far as land went, they didn't hesitate to go over the Alleghenies. And when the crown said, you can't do that, they said, wait a minute, you broke your promise. The crown of England promised that this land, as far as land went, and in those days they did know that it went as far as the Mississippi River. They didn't know much beyond that. They knew it went at least that far, and so they poured in, as you'd heard me say before, into the Ohio Valley. And the Ohio Valley, see, drains everything west of the Alleghenies going up north, and then all of the Midwest above the Ohio River, West Virginia now, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, Illinois, and then everything south, Kentucky, Tennessee. The Cumberland and Tennessee rivers drained all that area into the Ohio. So the Ohio drainage basin was where they poured in, and there was good land there down in the Delta area, south of Cairo, Illinois. That's all the Mississippi Delta going down to New Orleans. It fans out like this. That was all good tillable land, but they had to get there. And the first they came into Georgia, a lot of good tillable land. And of course, in the south, they planted hemp, tobacco, and cotton. Hemp. We call that today Mary G. Warner. Did you know that the hemp production is what is now Virginia, hemp, and in Kentucky, there was more hemp than there was tobacco up until after the war between the northern and southern states. Why? Well, they weren't smoking it; they were making rope out of it. And the maritime, the trade, the navies, and the merchant trade on the high seas demanded a lot of rope, and that's where it came from. And it was good money. George Washington, on his plantation after the war for separation from Britain, raised more hemp than anything else, grew a lot of it. And coming on into Kentucky and clean into western Kentucky and southern Missouri, as folk just kept pressing west, they grew hemp along with tobacco, more hemp than tobacco. Well, you can imagine, rope was demanded worldwide for ocean trade across the oceans. Tobacco is just something people smoked one pipe full at a time. So they had to have a lot more hemp, and you could make more money with it. And by the way, that was productive. Tobacco was destructive, as you know. A sad chapter in American history, but there it is. I always say, or did I say this, or did I hear somebody else say it? The red man finally won the war, and he did it with tobacco. He's the one that introduced the white boys to tobacco, and he's killed thousands upon thousands of more men with that than we ever did shooting them in the Indian Wars. I watched two of my granddads go down that way at relatively young ages. It was hard to watch. Lung cancer. And don't tell me that it wasn't caused by tobacco. It was. Very dangerous. Well, and of course, it's habit forming for some reason. Well, we got one more minute, so I'll try to say one more thing here. Well, I wanted to make the point. Well, just to note how this played out. I'd said that after the war, the colonies, most notably Virginia, had the largest land grant probably of all, the largest one of all the colonies. And the northern boundary of it was the northern edge of what is today West Virginia. And it goes way up. Matter of fact, isn't that almost north of the southern boundary of Pennsylvania? I believe it is. Way up there, you can look it up. And then the southern boundary is clear down against North Carolina. And that going straight west was all the territory of Virginia. It took in the lower third of Ohio, the lower half of Illinois and Indiana, and then extended, of course, on into Missouri. But people didn't think about that. That was just too far west to think was real in those days. It extended all through there. And after the war, in an act, well, here's what happened. During the war, Patrick Henry was governor of Virginia. And he sent 160, he sent a man who gathered up about 165 rough fellows. I mean, rough. I mean, these are men that actually read about them. They were lawless men, lawless. And they were trying to get away from the law, but they were tough. He gathered them up. His name was George Rogers Clark, and he had a commission from Patrick Henry to retake the lands that the crown had deeded to Virginia west of the Alleghenies, to go retake them with 165 men. Now, if you go on a map, you realize that's a lot of territory, but he knew if he would take the British forts, the most important ones at that time were Fort Kaskaskia in what is today Illinois on the Mississippi River. Fort Kaskaskia, that's the name of an Indian tribe, and Fort Vincennes on the Wabash River. And the British had garrisons in those two places. But that was far away from the world in those days, and they didn't believe that the Americans would ever try to come there, especially in the springtime when everything was flooded. And this was true at that time. Everything pretty near was underwater from Kaskaskia to Vincennes. They went to Kaskaskia first, and they knocked on the commanding officer's door and said, "What do you want?" He said, "Well, we're here to take over the fort." Well, that surprised him. He was a British officer. He didn't really have any choice because they outnumbered him. There wasn't many there. So what they ended up doing was making a big shindig out of it, and they had a big dance. And of course, the French girls were there because that had been a French colony before that. Clear from there, clean to New Orleans, you know. So they had a big dance, and the Americans took over that fort and threw the British out. And then they did the unthinkable. It was unthinkable they could have got there from Virginia, but they did. They walked. And then they came back across a flooded territory to the Wabash River at Fort Vincennes. And it was in the spring, the ice had broken up and it was flooded all through there. And most of the way across, they waded, either up to their ankles or up to their waists. Ice flows. It takes young men who are tough men to do that. It was cold. They didn't care. Here they come, kept their powder dry. They got to Fort Vincennes. That was across the Mississippi River to the Wabash. That's across southern Illinois. And they got to Vincennes and they started shooting at the fort. And every time they'd shoot, they'd run up to another place and shoot from there. And they had the general, the British officer, convinced there were 500 of them, but there weren't. And out of fear, he surrendered. They bluffed him. So after taking those two forts, they said, well, that helps secure our western territories. And they did secure them. And then after the war, the state of Virginia, in an act of magnanimous it was, to put it clear, the state of Virginia gave all of their territories west of the Alleghenies to the national government. We call it today the federal government. So they could sell it for $5 an acre. And that was from the northern border of North Carolina, running west as far as land went, to the northern border of what is today West Virginia, and that stretches up by a panhandle way up there north, clean almost to New York, everything coming west, to sell for $5 an acre to pay the war debt of our war with Britain. And that land sold at $5 an acre and kept selling. And some of the land where we farmed when I was growing up back in not too long ago, when you bought land, you got the whole abstract of all the deeds coming up, from the bottom up. And at the bottom of that land was a land patent title signed by President Andy Jackson. And he signed those things, and they were distributed from Shawneetown at the U.S. Land Office at Shawneetown, Illinois. The people that purchased land, and we just found this out about 20 years ago. We found out from a cousin that Mrs. Brent's great grandpa purchased a section of land from the general government, and this happened a lot too, at $5 an acre. A section's a lot. Where he got the money, I don't know. And then flipped it, divided it, and flipped it. A few years later, took the money, that was in Illinois, and then took the money and went to Nebraska and homesteaded other land. Well, people just kept pressing west, trying to make a buck. I had an uncle. I never knew him because he was dead by the time I was around, Uncle Marion Douglas. my great grandpa's brother, and he got into the business of real estate development. And what he would do, according to the family, he'd buy up a quarter section of land that nobody had ever lived on from the general government, and he would dig a well and build a cabin. He'd dig a well and build a cabin. And then when an immigrant came west, he'd sell it to them. It was a turnkey operation. You got water, you got a cabin to get your babies and your wife in. What a setup. And land you can farm if you got a plow. But it was set up so that they could survive the first winter. Well, he did that and made good money. I don't know what happened to him. We looked for him. Dad said he's buried in the Veterans Cemetery in near San Francisco, or Frisco, as we say, California. Probably took his money, made good money, and retired out there. I don't know. He was the one that had a mini ball in his neck, never could get it out. He always kind of crook necked like that because it somehow threw him off kilter. That's the story I got. Like I say, I never met the man. But that people just kept buying land, selling land, building cabins, cutting down the brush, trying to farm a little bit, have land. This all comes back to the fundamental trust settlement of God in this book, friends. And if you have this fundamental trust settlement of God as the theme of this book, and it has to do with the entrustment of land. When you read every detail in this book, try to see how you relate it back to that trust settlement. Well, what about, somebody said, what about when I read the Gospels and I read the New Testament about Jesus Christ? How does that figure into it? Well, it does, because Jesus Christ came to redeem a people to keep this thing going. It says so in the Bible. And in the final book of the Bible, the allodial title of all land on earth is given to who? The seals are broken. You remember where the seven seals of the seven scrolls are broken? Those are land deeds, and it says at the title to all the land, he is the allodial landlord, and we are here for that reason. We are here because of his land. Our salvation, friends, is not the all it ends all. I get to go to heaven. That's not the purpose. You do get eternal life, but there's a deeper reason that God has for you being here. And it is to take dominion over the land the Lord your God has given you, to take lordship over it according to his terms. Well, we covered, Miss Francine, a question or two. We covered 290 and 291. I'll finish with this one. It's easy. Who has the power to govern these territories as they become settled? And they aren't settled yet, by the way. Who has the power to govern them and to sell the land as happened where I'm from, to the settlers? Answer. Don't forget this. This is fundamental common law government according to our Constitution of the United States. Congress of the United States has absolute, unfettered authority and power to dispose of, sell, whatever they want, the land that belongs to the United States. I don't care whether it's a broken down military truck like Army surplus or a surplus pair of boots or land belonging to under the title of the United States. The Congress of the United States has absolute authority, just like you would have absolute authority to do whatever you want to with what is yours. You can sell it, you can encumber it, you can give it away, whether it's your old pickup truck or your house, whatever you want to do. Congress has that, what belongs to them, whatever they want to do. And what they've decided to do in the past is make sure the land is populated. Now, what do we have in America now? Since we've had a communist president named Franklin Delano Roosevelt, I don't say that lightly or as hyperbole. No, he was communist. It isn't said, but he was. And the policy beginning with him and some before him, but with him in spades, we've got to get people off of the land, off of the land. That's not biblical, friends. I know places at home. When I was running for Congress, I talked to some old folks down in the Shawnee National Forest. The Shawnee National Forest, before it was the Shawnee National Forest, was a beautiful place of farms, rolling hills, pasture land, cattle, corn, tobacco. I'm not saying tobacco is good for you. I'm just saying they were prosperous farms. And Roosevelt came in there with his policies and said, this entire counties along the Ohio River, this land now belongs to the United States. We're going to make a national forest out of it. We're going to pay you whatever we think it's worth. You all got to leave. And they forced them out. The Tennessee Valley Authority did the same thing, right in that same neck of the woods. The Wabash River Valley Authority. Then out west, it was the Columbia Valley Authority. They depopulated whole counties. We're going to make a national forest out of it. Why? Well, we want to preserve the national forest, but this isn't a national forest. This is valuable, productive land that's beautiful. Look at it. This one old fella down there told me he grew up down there. Before that happened, he said, I grew up on a farm down there in Pope County. He said it was beautiful, productive. You know, to have good pasture land, it needs to be have a little rhythm to it. If it's flat, just absolutely flat, and it's too small, the cattle will tramp it too much. And back in the Wabash Valley, we don't have ranches like they have out west of 2 or 3 square miles or more. We don't have to because we have enough rain. You can raise cattle on 160 acres, quite a few head. They got plenty to eat. There's a lot of grass. Then in the wintertime, you feed them hay. But if the land is just a little bit rolling, it won't be tramped so bad. And that's the way that land was down there along the Ohio River. It was rolling. You could farm it. You could run cattle on it. It drained well, you see. And the federal government took it, said, we're going to plant trees in here we can harvest. Well, what did they do? They planted trees in that area. They called it the Shawnee National Forest. They planted trees that were not indigenous, and nobody ever harvested any of them. And that forest down there is now a tangled, unproductive mess. Why? Why? I'll tell you why. Because what they say, this belongs to the American people. Well, what belongs to everybody belongs to who? Nobody. That's a maxim of our common law. What belongs to everybody belongs to nobody, and if it belongs to nobody, nobody's going to take care of it. And the worst trustee in the whole country of the United States is who? The federal government in Washington, D.C. Ask any Indian tribe out west. You'll be driving along, it'll say Indian Trust Land. Who's taking care of it? Nobody. Because what belongs to everybody? They say this land belongs to the American people. BLM land, national forest, this belongs to the American people. And if you go there, you will discover nobody's taking care of it. Nobody's cleaning up the dead wood. The forest fires are out of control. They're burning the land off. That's terrible. That's hard on land to burn it off more often than God wants that to happen. Well, we're not taking care of the land because we've allowed the federal government to come in and do it because of what I call collectivism, which another name for it is communism. Commune, that means, what's communism? They use that word because they're saying everything is common, everything is communal. The land belongs to everybody. It does? Well, what belongs to everybody belongs to nobody. Listen, if your wife belongs to everybody for their use, if your wife belongs to everybody, she doesn't have any protector at all. She belongs to nobody. And ladies, if your husband belonged to every other woman, he didn't belong to anybody. He's just out there loose. Nobody's taking care of him either. And if you donate your land to the state of whatever where you live, Alabama, Missouri, Same problem. It's going to belong to everybody there, and nobody's going to care about it. Nobody. And it's not going to be taken care of. The brush isn't going to be kept cut. The house is going to fall down. Oh, Lord have mercy. This land is your land. This land is my land. Remember that song? From California to the New York Islands, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters, this land was made for you and me. Now, this land is your land? This land is my land? No, no. Who wrote that song? A man who was an outspoken, blatant, war grade communist, Woody Guthrie. I can hear him singing it. He had a kickish kind of voice. People say, yeah, it's the pot calling the kettle black. I can hear him singing it, playing his guitar. This land is your land. He's from Oklahoma. He was a communist. He didn't hide it either. Our communist president, Roosevelt, hired him with federal taxpayer dollars to promote his communist programs, like the Columbia Valley Authority, the TVA, and all those songs he wrote. The taxpayer paid him big bucks to write to change. Watch this. To change the thinking of Americans. And that song, nice song, this land is your land, this land is my land. It sounds nice, but that song was designed to get people by the lyrics to think about a communal kind of a country where everything belongs to everybody and we don't have the right to hog any of it to ourselves. That's the evil empire. Just remember, what belongs to everybody belongs to nobody, and nobody's going to take care of it. When I was a boy, I was taught about, and you were too, maybe, the first Thanksgiving. Of course, that was the Pilgrims. They were a sect of the Puritan party from England, and they were trying to get to Virginia under a land grant. They got blown off course and landed way up north in a place called Cape Cod. It had been called Cape Cod long before that because the fishermen from Britain were coming over and taking massive harvest of cod and taking them back to England and making fortunes. So the place the Englishmen had been there, they had just never had a permanent settlement there. There was nobody to sell their cod to, or they landed at Cape Cod, which wasn't Virginia, so they had no authority. They had authority from the Crown of England to land in Virginia and establish a settlement and had a whole charter and all the things they were required to do under that promise. But when they got to Cape Cod, it was too late to try to go down Virginia. Winter had already set in. They couldn't do that. They knew they had no authority from the crown, so what did they do? What people did tramping across America for the next 300 years, 300 more years. They said, well, since we don't have any authority from the crown, we'll just, we have authority among ourselves, so we're going to draw up a constitution of sorts, and we're going to govern ourselves. There were those among them who were not part of the Pilgrims who said, we have no authority here, so we're going to do whatever we want. It's a free-for-all. At this point, they said, oh, no, it isn't. We're going to make the authority and we're going to run things. And they drew up a document that wasn't just about yay long, it wasn't very long, called the Mayflower Compact. And they forced those folk that weren't with them, that didn't want to do that. They said, no, we're in charge and you're going to follow it. We're going to use our authority. We're on land belongs to England, but we have no authority to be here, but we couldn't help be here. We don't have any other choice. So we're going to take the authority we have to make our own laws, and we're going to draw it up in this compact that we have authority to establish our own government. And that's what the crown would want us to do anyway. So we're going to do it. That set the stage, friends, right there. 41 men and little teeny tiny cabin on a little teeny tiny ship called the Mayflower. Before they went ashore, they drew that thing up and signed it. That set the stage. We're here in America. We're going to have to govern ourselves. Our circumstances, as Ben Franklin said later to the Crown, he said, you're not in appreciation of our circumstances in the New World. We're a little rougher. We've had to chop things out of the wilderness. And therefore, it created a different application of our common law. So we just have to do it ourselves. And we're loyal to the Crown before we broke up. But you're not recognizing our circumstances. We're in constant threat of being murdered by the native tribesmen there, and they've proven it. And now you're encouraging them by providing weapons and whiskey to encourage them. That was one of the complaints. Oh, by the way, the Declaration of 76. We're teaching that on Thursdays. Go to commonlawyer.com and join the class. We're going through it clause by clause and blow by blow. And that's one of the things that we'll talk about is how we dealt with in America. More of how we dealt with it here. It's different. We took our common law tradition and applied it to a different land with different circumstances. The law didn't change. No, the application, we had to use a different application. But in using that application, we just reaffirmed our common law tradition. This is Brent Allen Winters, commonlawyer.com, www.commonlawyer.com. Coming at you from the remote hinterlands of the Wabash River Valley, where the hogs, the frogs, and the dogs keep up a racket all night long.